Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening from wherever you're joining. Welcome to this important webinar on bridging water, sanitation, and climate agendas hosted by Sanitation and Water for All Partnership. My name is Anjani Kapoor, and I'm the Head of Policy Accountability and Results at SWA. I'm delighted to be your moderator today. Before we dive into the main discussion, I would like to highlight some housekeeping points as it's a virtual setup. So we offer interpretation services in English, Spanish, and Portuguese today, which you can access by clicking the globe at the bottom right corner of your screen. Also, a note to all the speakers, please select the language of your choice before you start the presentation, or if you want to hear a specific language. To all the participants, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your questions, and let's keep the discussion going in the chat box throughout the webinar. Now let's look at our agenda. Today, we will take a quick trip back to Baku to reflect on the outcomes of COP29 and discuss how we can prioritize water and sanitation further as we head towards COP30 in Belém. We are fortunate to have an incredible lineup of speakers, as you can see on your screen, including representatives from global, regional, and national levels who are dedicated to advancing this crucial agenda. So without further delay, I invite Patrick Moriarty, the CEO of IRC and the chair of Sanitation and Water for All Steering Committee. Patrick's intervention will focus on how effectively and strategically SWA and its partners have brought together the water, sanitation, and climate sectors through high-level initiatives and advocacy. I'm confident that Patrick's opening remarks will set a strong foundation for us for the discussions today. Patrick, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, Anjani, and again, good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you happen to be. It's afternoon for me. Really nice to be with everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome you on my own behalf and also on behalf of our CEO, Katarina de Albuquerque, who's unfortunately not able to be with us. But in any case, a pleasure to be with you for this important webinar on water, sanitation, and climate action as we look towards COP30. So I don't think I'm telling anyone anything new to say that we all recognize that the climate crisis is also a water and sanitation crisis, that extreme weather events, rising temperatures, changing rainfall patterns are already disrupting access to essential basic services, including safe drinking water and sanitation. And, of course, as always, those who are most impacted are the most vulnerable among us. As SWA works more closely with climate stakeholders, one thing that's becoming increasingly clear is that securing universal access to water and sanitation services can't happen in isolation. We have to embrace the full breadth of Sustainable Development Goal 6. In practice, this means ensuring that water, sanitation, and hygiene services are delivered in the context of sustainable water resource management and the protection of aquatic ecosystems. I want to take a moment to reflect, though, on how far we've come. Throughout my career, I've witnessed firsthand how the approach to water supply and sanitation has evolved on the global stage. In the past, I think we all recognize that global efforts focused primarily on expanding access to hardware, pumps and toilets, particularly under the Millennium Development Goals. However, we soon realized that delivering services and ensuring their long-term sustainability requires a more integrated approach, one that considers not only the hardware, but its management, including the management of water resources, taking into account climate resilience and environmental protection. The transition to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015 brought this much-needed shift, recognizing that water, sanitation, and hygiene are services and ones that must be addressed within the broader framework of sustainable water management and ecosystem protection. So now, with just 5 years left until 2030, we need to take a next step. We need to align this broader vision for SDG 6 with the Paris Climate Agreement. Water and sanitation services must be both climate resilient and recognized as central to broader resilience, both to incorporating climate adaptation and mitigation efforts. At COP28, the world came together to adopt the UAE Framework for Global Climate Resilience, a landmark achievement that finally places water and sanitation at the center of global climate adaptation. That was a huge moment for us. SWA and our partners played a key role in shaping this framework, ensuring that water and sanitation aren't just an afterthought, but a priority in global resilience building efforts. But we can't stop at agreements. Now is the time to act, to turn this framework into reality on the ground. And as chair of SWA's steering committee, I've seen firsthand the power of political leadership in driving real change for water, sanitation and climate action. Alongside our partners, many of you here with us today, we're proud to be working with the heads of state who are championing water, sanitation and climate action together. This October, just weeks before COP30, we'll convene our sector ministers meeting in Madrid, a high-level meeting bringing together ministers of water, sanitation and environment, and health, I suspect, to coordinate strong political commitments ahead of COP30. This will be a crucial milestone, not only for COP, but also in the lead up to the 2026 UN Water Conference. We must ensure that water and sanitation have a permanent place in climate negotiations moving forward. With so little time left until 2030, we need all hands on deck, and I call on all SWA partners and our stakeholders to actively engage in this process, whether that's through national climate planning, through global advocacy, through technical collaboration. We need you, and we need your efforts. The upcoming months offer a unique opportunity to shape the future of climate resilient water, sanitation and hygiene services. Let's work together to ensure that COP30 delivers real outcomes for the communities most affected by the climate crisis. And I'd like to close by extending my deepest thanks to all of you, and particularly all the speakers, for joining us today, for your time and for your expertise. I'm really looking forward to today's discussions, and after those discussions, to working together to drive meaningful change. Thank you very much, and Anjani, back to you.
Thank you, Patrick, for your remarks and also for giving us that line of sight to various global events wherein this advocacy can be strengthened further, including the upcoming sector ministers meeting, which is just before COP30. We now transition to our keynote speaker. I want to introduce our first esteemed keynote speaker, Cecilia Scharp. Cecilia is the Global Director of Water, Sanitation and Hygiene Program Group at UNICEF, leading the most extensive water and sanitation initiative within the United Nations. Over the past few years, her work has been pivotal in transforming these programs to become climate resilient. Cecilia brings years of experience in integrating water management with climate initiatives, and her insights will be invaluable as we navigate the road towards COP30. Welcome, Cecilia. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Anjani, for this really nice word, and thank you for having me here and being able to speak to all of you who have joined this webinar. First of all, I like to congratulate SWA and all its partners, of course, for organizing this important discussion that we're going to have today, where we are going to see various stakeholders and partners really sharing what they are doing and giving us insights and ideas on how we can ensure that water and sanitation remain prioritized in the climate agenda broadly. And then just to say, it's fantastic to see the number of people joining. I know this is the second opportunity over the day, and still we have more. Is it about 153 people that is joining? So this is really encouraging that we have all of you here and want to engage in our important agenda. So, I mean, I know, Patrick, you had a very long and very insightful introduction. And I think what I took out from that particularly is the importance of ensuring that water and sanitation is situated in the bigger picture. Understanding that we are part of managing water, managing pollution, ensuring that we have services that are maintained over time, even dealing with stress and shocks. But now I'm going to go back to my script and take you to what is prepared as my little introductory note here. But first, of course, just to say that this seminar is really important. We are on the road to November COP30 in Brazil. And there, as you said already, Patrick, there are key milestones over this year, and we need to ensure that we connect those dots as we move ahead. So we come well prepared to COP this year. And I think this is really the kickoff for that road somehow. So looking back a little bit at previous COPs, and also what José is going to present a little bit later in this seminar is the significant contributions that we have made already in recent years to this agenda to ensure that we have climate resilient drinking water and climate resilient sanitation as part now of the global goal of adaptation. We got it there in COP25 or 28, which was the turning point in recognizing the linkages between water, sanitation, and climate, which is not obvious still to everybody. The discussions and globements that we have reached already have laid a solid foundation to ensure that we will be part of the new global climate action. But still, as we understand, it's not time to sit back and relax yet, because the battle is over. And of course, what needs to happen is to get to action to ensure that services are running. So just to remind ourselves, this January that we just left was now the warmest January on record. And looking back at 2024, large-scale disasters impacted every continent. No one is safe. We saw towns washed away, we saw pollution of drinking water sources, damaged sanitation infrastructure, washed away agricultural land. We saw burnt lands and forests turning into ashes. So the globe's, of course, most marginalized and vulnerable communities, as you mentioned, Patrick, are those that always suffer the most. And these disasters should be a wake-up call that climate change is real and it's happening now. And this is, of course, why it's so imperative that we build systems and service system that can withstand these shocks and stresses and continue to provide these critical essential services to all, that they remain resilient to those shocks and stresses. So today we will hear about the initiative to develop a common definition on climate resilient water and sanitation services, which has been carried out under the umbrella of SWA. And this is really an important critical step, ensuring that we all have a common understanding, a framework and the definition on what is the requirements that is making an investment in water and sanitation resilient. It's something which we are not yet in agreement of. So what is the climate resilient solution looking like? We will also later explore the opportunities, how we can all influence and get water and sanitation in countries' climate strategies, the national adaptation plans, the NAPs, and the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. And of course, this is if it's not already happening, because several countries have been working on having water and sanitation in the NDCs or NAPs already. But we also discuss why it's critical and why it's critical right now. And this is to get involved in the ongoing discussions to develop the NDCs that are ongoing, particularly this year. And they should be ready and submitted by countries ahead of the meeting in Brazil later this year. So So there are ongoing processes. We need to get into those processes, get water and sanitation inside. So when countries submit their NDCs, we have already water and sanitation there. So to make this happen, of course, it doesn't happen by itself. The water and sanitation community, we need to talk with colleagues in the climate sector and work together. So during this seminar later today, we will hope to share insights from key climate negotiators that are participating, government leaders, and the UN and civil society experts that all can shed some light on how this will happening to embed water and sanitation in the strategies, national strategies. Also, while I have the word, I would like to mention another interesting online seminar organized by UNICEF and WHO Joint Monitoring Program, the JMP, later this week. This seminar will be about the JMP team presenting the status of the current development of global climate resilient WASH indicators for global progress monitoring. So this is very closely linked to what we will be discussing today. And I think you should be able to find the link to this seminar in the chat box. I can't see the chat box from where I'm sitting, but I hope it's happening. So just to round up, I want to thank everybody for joining. It is an important critical point. I believe we can make a difference and continue our effort to get water sanitation prioritized in the global agenda, and of course, vice versa, because we also, as practitioners, need to ensure that we are including water and sanitation in what we do. So to make this happen, I just say, let's work collaboratively, let's work together, and let's listen to this webinar today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cecilia, for that call to action, and the point to begin that is this integration at the national level between the climate policies and documents and water and sanitation to be plugged into that. So thank you so much for your remarks, and we look forward to be working with you on COP30 via engagement in the SWA climate task team and also for the sector ministers meeting. Thanks once again for joining. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Britta Horstmann, the co-chair of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC Adaptation Committee. Over the past few years, SWA has been collaborating closely with the Secretariat of the UN Climate Change Convention. So today we are honored to have Britta with us. Welcome to your very first SWA webinar, Britta. She will introduce in her presentation the role of the Adaptation Committee, and she will also share her remarks importance of water and sanitation in the global adaptation efforts. Over to you, Britta. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anjani, and also thank you for Patrick and Cecilia for your introductory remarks and the very good introduction and pointing out the challenges that lie ahead of us, how we are affected in our everyday lives, the SDGs that we need to implement, and of course also to align this to the goals that we see under the Paris Agreement, and also in all the call to action, Cecilia, which I think is very important. We have prepared some slides. I hope participants can see them. I can't see them yet on the screen, but building on the introductory remarks and overview from Patrick and Cecilia, I will try to zoom in on the goals and ambition that have been set by parties on the global goal on adaptation and the global framework for climate resilience. But before doing so, next slide, I was also asked to introduce respectively the work of the Adaptation Committee. It was established in 2010 already and is the principal body under the UNFCCC, providing expert guidance on adaptation and ensuring that adaptation is addressed coherently under the UNFCCC process, but also the Paris Agreement. And the core functions that we have are to provide technical support and guidance to parties, to promote synergies and strengthening the engagement with national, regional and international organizations, centers and networks, sharing relevant information, knowledge, experience, and good practices, but also to consider the information that is communicated by parties on their monitoring and review of adaptation action and support provided, which is very relevant also to look into the progress made, and also to provide information and recommendations drawing on adaptation good practices for consideration then by the conference of the parties and or under the UNFCCC or the Paris Agreement, the CMA. So even more important in this respect, I think it's important to be part of this webinar and also listen to the various experiences that are made by the participants here in this room on how we can improve the approach to adaptation. Next slide. So trying, yes, you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So in order to zoom into the ambitions related to the global goal on adaptation and the more recent agreement on the United Arab Emirates Framework for Global Climate Resilience, in short, UAE framework, let's briefly look into what parties under the Paris Agreement have agreed to. And as others have pointed out, many of the approaches, but also realities on the ground are interconnected. As in order to strengthen the global response to climate change in the context of sustainable development, parties have to decide on 3 key targets, which is on the one hand side to hold the increase of the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, and pursuing efforts to limit the temperature increase to 1.5 above pre-industrial levels, and recognizing that this would sufficiently reduce the risk of impacts of climate change. Furthermore, it is also important that increasing the ability to adapt to the adverse effects of impacts of climate change and foster climate resilience and low greenhouse gas emission development in a manner that does not threaten food production is a key target. And important that we make our financial flows consistent with a policy that pursues low greenhouse gas emissions and climate resilient development. So that I think this is very important also with a view to the SDG targets and the ambition to mainstream our response to climate change. So in the context of sustainable development. Furthermore, under the Paris Agreement, parties also decided, next slide, and established the global goal on adaptation of enhancing adaptive capacity, strengthening resilience, and reducing vulnerability to climate change, with a view to contributing to sustainable development and with a view to ensuring an adequate adaptation response in the context of the temperature goal. And next slide, in order to further guide the achievement of the global goal on adaptation and the review of overall progress in achieving it, and in order to guide and strengthen efforts, including long-term transformational and incremental adaptation, parties in 2023 adopted the United Emirates Framework for Global Climate Resilience with 11 targets for all countries. Next slide. In the framework, there are 4 targets related to the adaptation policy cycle, also called dimensional targets. And here, parties decided that by 2030, first of all, that all countries shall have impact, vulnerability, and risk assessments to inform their national adaptation plans. And by 2027, have established multi-hazard early warning systems and improved climate services. Second, that all countries have national adaptation plans and or similar planning processes and have mainstreamed these in all relevant strategies and plans. And related to this goal, parties in the first global assessment of progress, the so-called global stocktake, also agreed that countries have in place their national adaptation plans or strategies or planning processes by 2025. So this year is already an important milestone to look into the progress made in this regard. And third, the third goal, furthermore, parties agreed that all countries shall have made progress in implementing these plans. And last but not least, that countries shall have established and operationalized a system for monitoring, evaluation, and learning, which is key to learn from the practices and see whether adaptation takes place. Beyond, next slide, the dimensional targets, countries are urged to increase their ambition towards achieving 7 thematic targets targets on thematic action areas by 2030 and progressively beyond. And out of which I will only highlight the water target for time reasons now, which is the first one here on the slide, which says that all countries shall significantly reduce climate-induced water scarcity and enhancing climate resilience to water related hazards towards a climate-resilient water supply, climate-resilient and access to safe and affordable potable water for all. You will recognize the similarities to the SDGs. And of course, and from a systemic perspective, that was also outlined by Cecilia earlier on, this target is also relevant for other targets listed here, including, for example, food and agriculture, production, health, or biodiversity, just to highlight some. And overall, with the UAE framework, parties have set priorities that shall guide action and support, as outlined before, and that can guide and improve the review of progress, including at the next global stocktake. Next slide. And looking at the upcoming year, including towards Belém and some milestones on work on adaptation ahead, I'd like to highlight some key processes and milestones under the UN climate change process, and this is only a selection since much more work on adaptation is ongoing. So as said, we have the GST goal on NAPs. Furthermore, the LEC had also been requested to update the NAP guidelines in line with the UAE framework targets. Furthermore, there is the NAP Expo in April in Lusaka, where also your experience will be valued in case you have the possibility to participate. And in relation and with a view to enhance the assessment of progress, there's also work ongoing under the UAE Belém work program and indicators. I'm sure José will say more about it, where the goal is to identify and where necessary develop new indicators for the targets of the UAE framework. And we will expect a list of first indicator proposals by experts at the end of April. And with the goal or the overall goal is to decide on a final list of indicators at CMA 7, which is the acronym for the meeting of parties to the Paris Agreement in Belém. So the 7th meeting. And furthermore, there's also work ongoing by the AC in collaboration with a consultative group of experts, the ones that advise on reporting, and the least developed countries expert groups to draft recommendations on how to improve reporting on adaptation, action, and progress. And as I outlined furthermore, it's very important also to look into the best adaptation approach on the ground. And here we will continue the consideration of incremental and transformational adaptation approaches. There was a technical paper presented at the last COP, and it's important to continue that conversation and understand better how the two relate in practice and what it means to implement a transformational and or incremental approach, and how to move forward in a good manner. And furthermore, for the first time in Belém, we will also have a high-level dialogue on adaptation, the so-called Baku high-level dialogue on adaptation, with the aim of identifying ways of enhancing the implementation of the UAE framework. Next slide. Furthermore, a brief snapshot on some of the products and work that is ongoing and had been mandated by parties. As I said, both is key, enhance the implementation as well as enhancing reporting and assessing progress. And you find the codes, the QR codes on the right-hand side to find further information. So I mentioned the NAP guidelines already. The Adaptation Committee will also update a tool on navigating the landscape of support, where your support might be valued. We will also work on technical guidance and training materials. We have a survey where you can still hand in existing materials. There is also an interactive portal of country profiles with validated information from all countries where you can have a look and see what other countries are doing and implementing, including in your area. And of course, together with the LEG, we continue identifying gaps and needs. And there will also be a reader-friendly summary of the technical paper I mentioned on transformational adaptation, which might be relevant for your implementation. And Anjani, I finish in a minute, but let me also point out some other relevant progress in relation to reporting and assessing progress. So here, as I said, the indicator work is ongoing, particularly the report of the water experts might be relevant and of interest to you. There will be a progress report. There will also be a synthesis report on the biannual transparency reports. Cecilia mentioned the NDCs. I mentioned the work on improving reporting already, and the country profiles. Here we will also do a synthesis ahead of the next GST, but also as a basis to foster the implementation and to see where are gaps, where is further action and support needed. And also here, your contributions will be highly valued in the area that you work on. And last but not least, we also continue compiling methodologies for reviewing the adequacy and effectiveness on adaptation, together with the least developed countries expert group and the Standing Committee on Finance. And if you want to move to the last slide, just for completeness, so you find further information, of course, also on the AC website. We also have issued a publication on 30 years of adaptation under both processes, where you find this and further information, and including graphs, which might be valuable for your work. And thank you very much. Back to you, Anjani.
Thank you, Britta. And it's the discussions like this that help us bridge the sector so that we are not in our eco chain talking to the climate negotiators. So thank you for taking the time and joining us. Also really appreciate you taking us through some of the milestones and the various products on adaptation in the lead up to COP30. And we really look forward to working closely with you. So thanks again for joining. We now move to the second segment of our webinar, wherein we will focus on debriefing from COP29 and outlining our call to action for COP30. I am excited to introduce our next speaker because he's my colleague and our in-house climate policy expert, José Gesti. José, we truly appreciate your efforts in bringing us all together today. So over to you on the debriefing from COP29. We look forward to your intervention.
Thank you very much, Anjani. Just a quick note to the participants. I'm going to make my presentation in Spanish. So if you need interpretation, you can make use of the interpretation button and select the language for which you would like to have the interpretation on. Remember that we can have English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Como les decía, paso a hacer una breve presentación.
As I was saying, I will make a brief presentation of what just happened in COP29 just 2 months ago in Baku, in Azerbaijan. And I would like to briefly highlight some points that we believe are of utter importance for those who work in water, sanitation, and hygiene. as well as our colleagues who work in climate matters. Before I start my presentation, I would like to highlight that we have over 107 participants today, and not all of you maybe are aware of what's a COP, a conference of the party, or even what happens there, or maybe many of you could attend to some of these conferences. So I would just briefly summarize what happens in a COP. In a conference of the parties, we have a big conference that starts with high-level meetings, chiefs of state that convene, and the host country has the presidency of the COP. This gives the opportunity to the host country to present the agenda about the conference and to choose some of the topics that they would like to prioritize. And the presidency launches new initiatives. The Conference of the Parties is a conference that maybe opens different conversations about different topics, where we have different parallel sessions. So, for example, in water and sanitation, we have a specific pavilion devoted to water. There we have different conferences in parallel to everything that happens in the COP. So the COP, it's a big opportunity to launch new reports, as I was saying at the beginning, new initiatives, and of course, one of the main things that happens in this type of conferences is that we have climate negotiations about specific topics such as adaptation, mitigation, climate financing, among others. And the parties reach to different agreements to find solutions. So taking this into account, I'm going to now start with my presentation. In Baku and Azerbaijan, in COP29, the presidency launched a new initiative that is the new declaration in water and climate action that is connected to the launching of the Baku dialogue in water and climate action. The presidency of COP29 works with the UN for the economic in Europe, and also for the program of and for the environmental protection. So in this declaration, they highlight the different ways of working in different hydrographic confederations to approach the problems of climate change. And with this declaration, there is a strong call to embed water as well as sanitation and hygiene in the national policies. This declaration is signed by over 50 countries in the COP and is also endorsed by different international and national organizations, such as is our case and many of our partners for sanitation and water for all. Next slide, please. Now I will make a brief description, very briefly, of some of the reports that were launched that I believe that are relevant for our discussion. I'm going to be very brief, because our director from UNICEF already mentioned that in the COP, they have launched this definition about the meaning of water and sanitation that is climate resilient. So this definition of climate resilient water, sanitation, hygiene services. So also in COP29 in Baku, we celebrated that the Climate Green Fund has launched with our support and with the Resilience Alliance led by UNICEF. They have launched this thematic guidelines on how we can have this focus on sanitation with this green fund. This is a powerful tool that you can have in your hands to see what would be the storytelling to make proposals with this approach. Also, this could help you make the connection, for example, also with ecosystems, with food safety, health safety, and many other themes. Next slide, please. Another important launch together with UN Water is this paper that you can see on the screen. This is about water, sanitation, and mitigation, and it gives us good arguments on how we can introduce aspects related to water and sanitation as part of big mitigation topics such as transport, energy, waste, etc. We'd like to invite you all to navigate on this report, because I believe that you're going to find very helpful information when you revise your NDCs and to embed mitigation in water and sanitation policies. Next slide, please.
Les hago mención ahora también de cuestiones que han pasado en la COP.
I would like to mention some of the things that happen in COP. Here you can see a picture of the water pavilion from Baku, and we devoted one day to talk about the global adaptation globe in water and sanitation. We have talked about the work to develop indicators, and we have devoted a big part of the day on how we can have a big global framework and how to take it to action. We believe that it's very important to have a global framework, but it's even more important to apply it. Next slide, just to finalize. We have different launching and reporting, and now we have what would be the negotiations within the COP that our colleague Britta co-chairs in many occasions. We, as observers, can see what happens in the negotiations, and they have reached the resolutions, and they hope that for COP30 there is a map of indicators to measure and assess the progress in the objectives that Britta mentioned before: water, sanitation, food safety, etc. So the idea is to have around 100 indicators in the framework to assess the progress. One of the agreed resolutions is to launch what we call the Baku high-level dialogue on adaptation. This ensures that this adaptation and framework that was presented can travel from COP to COP. I will not talk about the days of 2025 because Britta has already mentioned one of the main dates, and I will finish my presentation with the next slide. And I would like to mention the most important agreement in finance. So as from 2035, there is a target of mobilizing 300 billion annually for climate financing. Well, that's all. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jose, for taking us through. And I think we have already kind of started these discussions in the chat around the expectations from COP29 not being met fully, or the limited focus on sanitation. So I would appreciate if you could start taking some of those questions in the chat. Now, as we ahead to COP30, I'm eager to introduce our next speakers. Please join me in welcoming Daniel Ddiba, Research Fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute, and a very dedicated SWA task team member, along with Hanna Plotnykova, Environmental Affairs Officer at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. Today, they will present a call to act.
Anjani, I think we go first with definition.
Okay. Sorry about that. Not sure how I jumped that. Okay, thank you. We have those slides here. So apologies, Jorge and Kelly. So let me welcome you again. Welcome to Jorge Alvarez Sala. He is the co-chair of SWA Climate Task Team, and he is also the WASH advisor at the UNICEF headquarters in New York. Joining him is Kelly Latham, a global advisor for Water for People, specializing in climate and water resources management. They will be taking us through the water sanitation and hygiene, climate resilient systems definition, and how we arrived at it. Over to you both, and apologies for completely skipping that part.
Thank you, Anjani, and a very warm welcome to everyone. As Jose mentioned earlier, the Sanitation and Water for All Climate Task Team has been working over the last couple of years on a sector definition of climate resilient WASH services. Next slide, please. I still see yes, this one. Why we did this? Well, first, because there wasn't one commonly agreed definition, and we risk having fragmented interpretations of what climate resilient WASH services mean. In particular, since there is a growing number of WASH sector stakeholders trying to get access to climate finance, we believe that there was a need for some internal consensus before we reach the climate sector. But also because the Global Goal on Adaptation framework, which was approved at COP28 in Dubai, put climate resilient water and climate resilient sanitation as one of the 7 priority sectors in the adaptation agenda. Therefore, we needed to break down what climate resilient WASH mean and propose global metrics to the adaptation agenda. Therefore, this process of coming with a definition is very much linked with another process led by the Joint Monitoring Program, the UNICEF and WHO, JNP, and GLASS, the Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water. So we try to combine those two efforts. How did we do that? Well, we used the Sanitation and Water for All Climate Task Team as the umbrella to bring as many different stakeholders as possible and try to bring as much consensus as possible within the sector. This iterative process with different versions took almost 2 years and involved over 100 people from over 40 different organizations, including governments in the global north, in the global south, civil society organizations, donors, development banks, academia, UN agencies. So it was quite of a lengthy and at times painful process, but I believe that we have developed something useful for the sector. In the next slide, you can see the result of that process. The definition, which I'm not going to read, is aligned with the IPCC definition, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change definition of resilience, but is specific for the water sanitation hygiene sector. Each of the words in this definition is further explained in the document. So I included in bold: anticipate, respond to, cope with, recover from, adapt to, or transform. Each of the words have a specific meaning and bring to the WASH sector concepts such as transformation, which are relatively new to the WASH sector, but are concepts of growing importance within the climate negotiations and the broader adaptation agenda. The document, which is available at the moment in English and Spanish, and I hope soon in French, aims to move beyond a definition and suggests 7 criteria across 5 dimensions, which are infrastructure, environment, service providers, users and the private society, service authorities, and governance. But I already went a little bit over time, so allow me to pass the floor to Kelly Latham, who will explain how this definition strengthens the WASH climate action and the next steps. Kelly, over to you.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Jorge. So yes, our hope is that this definition that is strategic, comprehensive, collaborative, really allows us to engage in all of the processes, plans, frameworks, actions that have been mentioned so far by José, Britta, and Cecilia in 4 key areas. We see 4 real opportunities for that connection. The first one is in supporting national policies, thinking about the NDCs and the NAPs, and the continued effort to get WASH squarely within those. This definition will hopefully allow for a clear way to integrate more confidently WASH planning in those planning processes. The second one is around climate finance, building from getting WASH in those plans and having a clear definition that speaks to risks and speaks to the necessary elements of a strong climate rationale. It opens the opportunity to unlock the different climate funds and other financing mechanisms in the climate space. Thirdly, there's been reference to monitoring and the efforts with UNICEF, World Health Organization, with the JMP, to actually have a way to move in a similar direction with a common goal that we're monitoring progress against. This now becomes an opportunity. It was a roadblock before this definition. And then lastly, through the collaborative process that's been ongoing and the strategic nature of it, there is this opportunity with the same definition and the same orientation and goal that there really can be global alignment. And then if we go to step, the next slide, thinking about that global alignment and the collective action that we hope is now possible, I want to finish with just taking those concepts and those hopeful uses to more concrete actions, things that everyone here in this call, in whatever perspective you have, whether donor, civil society, government, what we can all do is take immediate next steps towards action around these 4 areas. And so we can advocate now, we can encourage our own countries or countries we are working in to include climate resilient WASH in those national climate planning tools, the NDCs and the NAPs and climate finance proposals, and also integrate climate resilience into the different WASH policies and plans that exist. We also can start engaging. I think that we had a nice background of how we can actively engage in UNFCCC, in COP30, in the UN water processes, with greater clarity and confidence about where we are trying to get to with climate resilient WASH. We can also engage directly in the development of the metrics and the indicators. I think in the chat now there is a link to a session tomorrow, I believe, or and the 13th possibly, to engage directly. That's a clear call to action that anyone here can do in this week, to engage in these processes and then think about how you yourself are monitoring progress towards resilience. And then lastly, now is the time to continue or start mobilizing climate finance, using this to work with donors, multilaterals, climate funds, development banks, to be able to scale investments in WASH. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Jorge. And thank you, Kelly. See the amount of wonderful information we would have missed if we would have quickly jumped to COP30. So thank you both, first for these valuable contributions, but also for spearheading this incredibly important initiative, because definitions are those building blocks, right? So now, finally, we move to looking ahead to COP30. Please join me in welcoming Daniel Ddiba. Daniel, we are welcoming you for the second time. So I think you're already a keynote speaker then. Daniel is the research fellow at the Stockholm Environment Institute, as I was saying, and he is actively engaged in the SWA climate task team. He's joined also with Hanna Plotnykova, who's the Environmental Affairs Officer at the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe. So today they will present a call to action based on recent studies conducted by WaterAid, the Stockholm Environment Institute, the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and SWA. This call to action emphasizes the importance of engaging actively in national processes, just like Cecilia was mentioning in her remarks. And these are related to, of course, the National Adaptation Plans, NAPs, and Nationally Determined Contributions, NDC. So let's hear it from Daniel and Hanna. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Anjani, for this wonderful introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues from wherever you're joining from. I have the privilege of going through this small session of the webinar just to provide an overview of some of the work that we've been doing together with partners, exploring why and how to integrate water, sanitation, and hygiene in nationally determined contribution and national adaptation plans, so within national climate policy frameworks on the overall. With regards to the question of why to integrate, I think that has been covered quite extensively already from the beginning. Patrick and Cecilia in their comments provided an overview of why exactly we need to have integration between climate and WASH from a policy perspective. But a lot of what we'll discuss is where things stand at the moment, and also how stakeholders at a national level can go about addressing these issues. But so to start with, what exactly are these? Because in the climate space, there can be a lot of jargon that perhaps might be unfamiliar to many people that might come from a WASH background like myself. And so this slide was put mainly just to provide an opportunity for everyone to be on the same page with regards to what these key terminologies are. So with regards to national adaptation plans, these are, of course, strategic processes at a national level that help countries to identify what their priorities should be as far as adaptation to climate change is concerned. And the nationally determined contribution create and outline an overall view of the country's climate commitments, both with regards to adaptation, but also mitigation goals. I know sometimes people think that maybe, okay, since we have NAPs, they only deal with adaptation, and then NDCs only deal with mitigation. But actually, NDCs also have adaptation goals. Why integrating water and sanitation into climate policy frameworks that have been covered. But the interesting thing here to note is that 2025 is really a pivotal moment for all of us in the WASH sector and with regards to integrating these policy areas. Within COP28, there was a call for countries to revise NDCs by 2025 and also to develop national adaptation plans, as previous speakers have described very clearly and articulately. And so there's an opportunity for those of us from the water, sanitation, and hygiene sector to really engage with colleagues from the climate community, if I might use that term, to align our efforts, but also to raise ambition for climate action in the WASH sector. Next slide, please. So this part will give an overview of studies that we have done recently. 3 studies having different geographical focus, but also slightly differing a bit in terms of the thematic focus, but all within the overall frame of understanding how to integrate water supply, sanitation, and transboundary water management into policy level, policy frameworks at a national level, like NDCs and NAPs. And these studies have been done over the past, a few months, over the past 1 year, together with SWA and SCI. We did one study. UN Economic Commission for Europe conducted another study having a global and pan-European focus, covering both water sanitation and hygiene, but also transboundary water management and cooperation. And then from Water Aid, there was a study that had a geographic focus on 9 countries with water aid programs, with a focus on water sanitation and hygiene, but also gender. While the study that we did at SCI together with the SWA Secretariat had a global focus, and only the scope was limited to sanitation. Next slide, please. So to highlight a few of the findings from these studies, which were done in a coordinated manner, and also sharing and exchanging and sharing, of course, data that we had together, but also assessment frameworks between these studies. The first thing is that we noted that with regards to NDCs, and the extent to which water supply, sanitation and hygiene and transboundary water management are incorporated or addressed in the NDCs. And so we see on the screen with these results that are shown right now, the results of the study that was conducted by the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe with regards to integration of these 3 areas. And we see that the data that was used came from a tool that has been developed by the German Institute for Development, along with the Stockholm Environment Institute, called the NDC SDG Connections tool, which essentially takes data from available NDCs and try to map them out with the various targets of the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. And this data set represents about 144 countries as of the time that we obtained the data. That was May 2024. So all the nationally determined contributions that had been submitted by these 144 countries to the UNFCCC were included in this data set. So it's quite comprehensive and gives a comprehensive picture of where things are with regards to integrating WASH and transboundary water management into NDCs. And as you can see, there is a lot of red in each of these pie charts showing the 3 areas: water supply, sanitation and hygiene, but also transboundary water management. And we see that there's relatively still a poor integration of these thematic areas into the nationally determined contribution. And in this case, just to highlight that red means particular NDCs, the percentage of NDCs where these 3 areas were not mentioned at all, whereas green on the other end of the spectrum is areas where there is at least 3 or more activities in an NDC addressing each of these thematic areas: water supply, sanitation and hygiene, and transboundary water management and cooperation. Next slide, please. So taking a deep dive further into looking specifically at sanitation, again, with this same data set, we try to, okay, if you broke down each of the NDCs into the constituent activities, how many of those activities on a global level deal with sanitation and hygiene? And so that's specifically SDG 6.2 and SDG 6.3. So we're able to zoom in really on how sanitation is reflected in these NDCs. And again, we see that there is currently a poor integration relatively of sanitation and hygiene in these policy documents. Out of a total of over 8,000 activities in all the NDCs, and remember these are NDCs from 144 countries, so they vary in the number of activities that they have therein. But all these activities together, only 168 activities. So that's only 2% of the activities altogether deal with sanitation and hygiene. In other words, SDG 6.2 and SDG 6.3. And this really shows that there is still a relatively low level of integration. However, I should note that if you compare the indices that were available as of May last year with those that were available 4 years ago, because a similar analysis was done at SCI in 2020. And we see that there is a big increase within the activities specifically related to SDG 6, that sanitation-related activities have a much larger proportion currently. Next slide, please. Okay, and again, zooming in on the thematic area of water supply and transboundary water management from the study that was done by UNFCCC, we see that there is still a higher level of integration, specifically when it comes to the national adaptation plans. Remember, the previous results I presented were specifically with regards to nationally determined contributions, whereas this focused on the national adaptation plans. As of the time that this analysis was done, there were 58 national adaptation plans that had been submitted by countries. So this essentially means 58 countries. And we see that with regards to these thematic areas, there is a much higher level of integration. And again, we use the same legend here, where green shows national adaptation plans that had at least 3 or more activities specifically related to each of these 3 thematic areas: water supply, sanitation and hygiene, and then transboundary water management and cooperation. Whereas red is for those areas where there was no activity included at all in the national adaptation plans. And I think a major reason why we see this contrast between the nationally determined contributions and the national adaptation plans is that many people understand the linkage between WASH and climate from an adaptation perspective. With regards to mitigation, there is not so much, and we see that even when you actually look at the actual activities included in the nationally determined contributions, there is a higher proportion of adaptation-related activities compared to mitigation activities. It seems that within the community, the linkages from an adaptation perspective are much better articulated and much better understood so far compared to the linkages from a mitigation perspective. Next slide, please. So going back again to the question of sanitation, we also asked ourselves, what is the extent, if we flip this coin to the other side? We've been talking about the extent to which WASH is included in climate policy frameworks, but if we asked what is the extent to which climate change is included or addressed within WASH sector policy framework. So this is about, water plans or urban sanitation plans, etc. In this particular case, our scope only focused on sanitation, and we picked data from the UN Water Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Water. So this is an analysis that is done about every couple of years, and the most recent survey that was sent out to and got responses from 121 countries was done in 2021 to 2022, with the report being released in the last quarter of 2022. And in this particular data set, all the countries that responded, over 120 of them, were asked, okay, to what extent do your policies and plans address the risks of climate variability and climate change risks to WASH services? So that's the 2 pie charts at the top. And then the other question, the 2 pie charts at the bottom, where do your policies and plans address climate resilience of WASH technologies and management systems? And again, this was disaggregated by those policies and plans that deal with urban sanitation and those that deal with rural sanitation. Of course, the data set also had data with regards to water supply, but this is just zooming in on the sanitation-related questions. And we can see in this data set that less than half of the countries that responded were including, as of that time, 2020. Of course, some things could have changed between then and now, but it's still quite alarming that just less than half of the countries do have risks of climate change to wash services and wash technologies and management systems considered or included or addressed in their sanitation-related policies and plans. So I think the of work for us to do to advance integration in these policy areas from both sides. Next slide, please. So going forward, what exactly can we do? What does this analysis indicate to us, and what should we do about it? These are 5 main takeaways that we have addressed, and then my colleague will mention a few others. One is that I think we need to work on integrated and very comprehensive baseline assessments of where exactly things are with regards to the linkages between sanitation and climate, both from a mitigation and adaptation perspective. It's imperative for countries to jointly assess water availability, the quality and demand, including for transboundary basins, so that they can identify climate vulnerabilities and ensure that NDCs and NAPs really reflect water and sanitation realities. Without these baseline assessments, it's difficult to actually reflect the reality. Second, it's important to have an inclusive stakeholder engagement process while developing these NAPs and NDCs. Climate policy formulation needs to include water stakeholders from the water sector, sanitation, health, urban planning, but also transboundary water management, so that there is really cross-sectoral and cross-stakeholder collaboration and the recognition of WASH aspects and their role in resilience and mitigation. And in addition to having, of course, an inclusive process, that is only when we can have a shared vision for climate mitigation and climate adaptation as far as water supply, sanitation and hygiene and transboundary water cooperation is concerned. Of course, some of the speakers previously have mentioned about ongoing work to define what climate resilient WASH really means. And this is very key in feeding into creating a shared vision for climate resilience at a national level through, of course, consultative processes, but also having gender responsive targets that are addressed in this collective vision. Implementation frameworks are also very critical, and it's imperative for countries. Of course, one way is about updating transboundary water agreements so that they can integrate climate resilience aspects, but also using existing partnerships, for example, SWA, as well as other stakeholder partnerships of this nature that can together create global platforms where these aspects can be discussed together and a shared vision can be shared across stakeholders. And lastly, and José highlighted this briefly, is about securing financing for climate resilient development programs. So the GCF financing is an opportunity for us to take advantage of, but there's also other climate resilient financing mechanisms that are important to take advantage of so that we can advance the climate resilience agenda for water supply, sanitation, and transboundary water management and cooperation. Over to you, Hanna. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, and hello, dear colleagues. I would like just to add briefly from a transboundary perspective. As mentioned, baseline assessments are quite important, and it is also crucial to take into account already existing transboundary assessment water resources. Also, as mentioned, it is important to make transboundary agreement climate proofed, and stakeholder engagement is crucial. Here, transboundary basin organizations should be involved, and also they can serve as a platform for engaging other stakeholders. It is crucial that countries harmonize their adaptation and mitigation objectives, and also that financing is facilitated for transboundary projects. Here, there was a question about access to the research we are presenting. There is a QR code to UNFCCC research, and I put also it in the chat. Next slide, please. And I would like also to refer to the Water Convention, which is a unique global legal and governmental framework for transboundary cooperation. It can actually provide quite a lot of guidance on how to include transboundary water management into NDCs and NEPs. And we have a dedicated meeting on that of the Task Force on Water and Climate on 21st of March, where we will be discussing this topic, and also we will have case studies from countries which are working on their NDCs and NEPs. And this task force will be preceded by the global workshop on increasing climate resilience with focus on floods and health on the transboundary and national levels. So you are welcome to join these two events. I will put links in the chat. And if it's not possible for you to join in person, there will be also web streaming. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Hanna and Danielle. Now, just in the interest of time, I will very, very quickly give the floor to José. We were thinking time, right, José? But seldom does it happen in webinars wherein we have some such excellent speakers and expertise. So over to you, José, for the national level discussion and also to take us through the interactive polls, please.
Thank you, Anjani, and we are excited. We are driving to the last part of our webinar, but the way we wanted to proceed now is by having a discussion with, we've been claiming, right, over the last hour, the importance of having water supply, water in general, sanitation integrated in climate policy, and the other way around, having climate well integrated into water and sanitation policies. But we wanted to highlight a successful example on how this is being done at the national level. I would like to introduce our discussion today. Maybe we can have the slides. And I would like to introduce Cássio Rampinelli. Cássio is working in Brazil as an infrastructure analyst for the Agência Nacional de Águas. I try my best in Portuguese as well. The National Agency for Water and Sanitation. And what we would like to showcase here, and Cássio will give us the details, is how a tool has been used in Brazil. It's a tool powered by the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, AGWA, who is another partner of SWA. This tool is called the Water Resilience Tracker, and it's being used in the formulation of national adaptation plans and revisions of NDCs to try to make sure that water and sanitation is well reflected in climate policy. But this, while it may be boring hearing to me, it will be surely much more interesting to hear Cássio. And I would invite you, Cássio, to tell us a little bit what is your experience working with this tool, the consultative processes that you've been able to put in place, and how, what are the results, right, of using this tool to integrate water and sanitation into climate policy, evaluating the trade-offs between multiple water using sectors in Brazil. But again, over to you, Cássio. You will make much more justice to this conversation for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. First, on behalf of the National Water and Sanitation Agency of Brazil, I extend our gratitude for the opportunity to participate in this countdown to COP30 webinar. Special thanks to the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, AGWA, especially John Nephew, Ingrid Timbo, Idris Maliar, and Mario Perez. And also our sincere appreciation goes to the task force from the Federal University of Ceará, led by Professor Assis, for their invaluable support in implementing the Water Tracker tool. And furthermore, I would like to acknowledge our moderator, Anjani, Kapoor, and José, and our esteemed speakers for their contributions to this important event. So, considering your points, I think I will divide my talk in three parts. I believe that first, I have a presentation, but I will not use the slides since we have time constraints. But I have recorded a presentation to COP29. I can share the link to the audience for those ones who are interested in going into more details about how the water tracker tool was applied and the documents that were evaluated. So I'll be happy to share it after I try to address the topics that you put. So in terms of background, the development of the water tracker was made possible through a collaborative partnership between the National Water and Sanitation Agency of Brazil and the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, funded by the Inter-American Development Bank and executed by a technical team at the Federal University of Ceará. This initiative aims to transform climate commitments into actionable and fundable investments. So the water tracker framework aligns with both the national and global climate goals and policies. So Brazil, with its continental expanse and diverse biomes, presents unique challenges and opportunities. So while our biomes contribute to environmental resilience, they also introduce certain vulnerabilities. And as a rapidly growing economy, Brazil faces the dual challenge of balancing economic growth while ensuring environmental sustainability in its national climate planning. So the water tracker is an effective tool in navigating these complexities, supporting policies that address the country's specific challenges. So how it has been used. So practically, the water tracker comprises 153 questions across 4 main sections. These sections assess the integration of water into national climate plans, evaluate water's role in national planning, delve into sector-specific water considerations, and explore connections to climate financing. The technical team from the Federal University of Ceará had developed an artificial intelligence tool that was designed to speed up and improve the efficiency when applying the tracker through thousands of pages of paperwork. And the tool has been applied to 8, in this first phase, to 8 strategic national documents, including National Plan for Water Resources, the National Plan for Water Security, the National Plan for Basic Sanitation, the National Determined Contributions, to name a few of them. So through this tool, we ensure the smooth integration of water-related policies in assessed plans, optimizing potential investments across multiple water-using sectors. So to summarize, right, I can share with you some outputs and impacts that we expect by implementing the tool in a general perspective. So we expect enhanced policy alignment by systematically integrating the water considerations into climate policies. So the tracker ensures coherence across different sectors, leading to more unified climate agenda. We expect informed investment decisions. The tool provides actionable insights, enabling policymakers to prioritize investments in water infrastructure and management, so optimizing resource allocation. Strengthened governance, so through its comprehensive assessment framework, the tracker promotes improved governance structure, enhancing interagency collaboration and accountability in climate planning, and also increased resilience. It builds systems that better withstand climate impacts. And it also facilitates access to climate finance. So it positions Brazil to leverage national funding opportunities. I believe that it's a great challenge for a lot of developing countries as Brazil. And also it empowers our stakeholders with skills and knowledge for effective implementation. So in a nutshell, these outcomes not only strengthen Brazil's climate planning, but also set a global precedent for integrating water considerations into climate strategy. So I believe that I could go through a general perspective about the water tracker tool, and I will share the website, the recorded presentation that go into detail in the chat, and also we are planning to expand the application of the tool to regional plans, and also involving other government representatives, such as the Environment and Climate Change Ministry, for instance. So I hope that I addressed the main points that you were expecting in this report about the Water Tracker 2 and the application and the experience that we have in Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you, Cássio. Thank you very much. And you indeed, you give us hope, right? We've seen in the analysis a lot of red in those pie charts, but I think we've been able to showcase a successful experience with the use of this tool and your political will as well to move this agenda forward, a successful case study. And I'm sure that the audience will benefit from the links that you have mentioned if you can place it in the chat box. So from my side, I will hand over back to you, Anjani, as we are closing.
Thank you so much, Jose. And I think when we are kind of sending the slides and the recordings and everything to all the participants, we can send in the questions that you'd prepare, which we couldn't take, because that information will be excellent for us to understand where the gaps are in terms of integration of the policies and where the advocacy entry points are. So thank you all. Thank you to all our speakers. These have been some of the most informative 85 minutes for me. Maybe I'm biased being the moderator, but let's quickly move to the closing remarks now. We have with us Leslie Porris, who is the co-chair of SWA High-Level Political Dialogue Working Group. She's also the lead policy analyst, WASH Financing at WaterAid. Over to you, Leslie, please. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, thank you so much. And again, it's I struggled to wrap up, as you pointed out, 85 minutes of really fascinating and fantastic information in a few minutes. So I'm going to do my best, and I tried to sort of organize it in a lot of things. And first of all, I would be remiss to open this without, first of all, thanking you and the team for really bringing together this breadth of experience and insight for the larger benefit of all of us. And I think this is an example of what we do as SWA. So thank you for that. And I think across this group, we really heard, first and foremost, celebrating the achievements and the impact that we have made as individual organizations, but especially as a collective, right? We heard this celebrated at the beginning, both by Patrick and Cecilia. We also heard it mentioned by Daniel when he highlighted, for all the change that we still need to see, this is substantially more than there was 4 years ago. Right. And I think we always have to, and the what's at stake, requires us to continue to do more, but we should also always remember that we're doing a lot right now. And it is, again, I think through such groups like SWA that this is really evolved and allowed to happen. And I think this conversation will perpetuate, and help with more of that. And some of those celebrations are, we have, as Jose and others gave more detail upon, water as an indicator within the global goal for adaptation. The more recent achievements, both in Dubai and then in Baku, related to the Belém work program, related to the Baku Declaration on Water. We have the more recent GCF Sanitation Index, and also prior to that, we had the definition in GCF Annex on water security. We have the more recent definition on climate resilient WASH services, right? And we heard both Jorge and Kelly break that down quite extensively. Patrick and Cecilia also, celebrated the success, but reminded us that we cannot be complacent, right? And that there is still a lot more way to, further to go. But the host of ways in which we can engage was beautifully drawn out, not only by Jose, not only by Kelly, also highlighting Britta from, the way in which we can engage with the UNFCCC Adaptation Committee. But then there's taking that to the sort of the really global, the uber global, if you will, by the UNFCCC level. But there's also the critical importance of affecting change nationally and using the tools that we have collectively developed to really move us forward again as a group towards our collective goals. So just now we heard from Cássio, sort of really highlighting how some of these tools have been helping make a difference and will continue to move progress forward in Brazil. And we also heard Kelly's list of the different host of tools and the way in which we can make our case more effectively. The findings I thought were really fascinating that Daniel provided that came from SEI as well as from my own colleagues at Water, about how you can really integrate water and wash and sanitation more strongly into the NDCs and into the NAPs. I thought there was also an important point there too, as we say, we congratulate ourselves as we continue to make ourselves do more, is the work that we can do not only in integrating water and sanitation into these existing formats, but how we as a WASH community need to perhaps be a bit more intentional about really planning for climate resilience in our own work, right? And it's a two-way street. We need to make that outreach, and we have more and better tools and understanding of how to do that thanks to this group. But then also now we also have to really embed it into our overarching practices. And again, taking it up from the national movie, I took it from the uber global down to the national, and then I want to have that reminder that it's not only national but also transboundary, as was highlighted in particular by Hanna, right? Because we know water basins don't align with political boundaries, right? And many of these important water decisions have to be taken in collaboration with our neighbors. And I think that that's a really nice way to close out what was a really rich and enriching conversation. And again, thank you, SWA, for the role that you continue to play in making sure we have a venue to explore and to advance together. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for those closing remarks, and as amazing as you did in the first session. And it's, as I said earlier, it's a mammoth task for you to do. So thank you, everyone, to our speakers, to the keynote speakers, to all the presenters, but also the logistics team that has been supporting us through the day. I now leave the session and speak to you all soon in different spaces. Bye-bye.